In 1916, the Pocahontas Fuel Company began building 120 houses at the mouth of Barber's Creek in Wyoming County, West Virginia. 2 years later, the coal mine opened, and it was called the Pocahontas No. 3 Mine. Southern West Virginia has some of the highest quality coal in the world, and the Pocahontas No. 3 Mine has the highest quality coal in the region. That makes it some of the best coal on earth.
The town is named after Isaac Thomas Mann, so the name of the town is his first two initials and his last name. I like to cross my I's and dot my T's, so before we start, I had to look this up. Mann, West Virginia is in neighboring Logan County, but it's not named after this man, it's named after a different man called Mann. The Itmann man, he spells his last name with two N's, but the man in Logan County is only spelled with one N. Isaac Mann was born a couple counties east of here, in Greenbrier County, in 1863. That's about 20 years before the coal boom started. His uncle ran the Greenbrier Bank in Alderson, and that was his first job, working there as a teller. This is Bramwell in Mercer County. It was established by Joseph Bramwell in 1888. He had been a surveyor for the railroad and had come here to map out future coal mines. And while he was in the process of doing that, he purchased this land and began dividing it into individual plots to be sold to the coal barons for them to build their mansions.
In 1889, the Bank of Bramwell was founded by Isaac's cousin James. Isaac helped him organize it and worked as its teller. Now Isaac's uncle, who owned the Greenbrier Bank, that was James's dad, and he was a chief stockholder in the Bank of Bramwell. A year after founding the bank, Isaac organized and began construction on the Bramwell Presbyterian Church, which is still in use today. As more coal barons built their mansions in Bramwell, the Bank of Bramwell just kept on growing. By the late 1800s, 17 millionaires lived in Bramwell, and per capita, that was the highest ratio in the country. In fact, the legend is that the Bank of Bramwell had so much cash on hand that the janitor used to take a wheelbarrow full of leather pouches full of cash and take it right down to the train depot.
Of course, no one ever tried to stick up the bank janitor, because the coal companies had some certified goons working for them, and everyone knew they weren't playing about their money. These guys machine-gunned tent cities of striking miners and their families in the middle of the night. Imagine what they would do to you if you physically took their money. Isaac's next big break came in 1901. The bank controlled 300,000 acres of land that was owned by the Flat Top Land Association. That land association had been established by Frederick Kimball, the president of Norfolk and Western Railroad. So, in 1901, Isaac arranged the sale of the Flat Top Land Company to Norfolk and Western, and it was renamed the Pocahontas Fuel Company. Now, while all that's going on, turn-of-the-century investor J.P. Morgan is working on forming a steel monopoly. He had merged 3 steel companies to form U.S. Steel, and now he was looking for a source of high-quality coal. The mine companies operating on the Pocahontas Fuel Company land paid them royalties on the coal mined. J.P. Morgan wanted his own coal fields. Isaac set up the deal to sell U.S. Steel Gary Holler in neighboring McDowell County. Those mines would produce a quarter of the coal mined in the entire county. This deal made Norfolk and Western a $10 million profit, and after that, the bank was worth over $1 million and ranked the 3rd most valuable bank in the state out of 115.
This episode of the Neighborhood Backwoods History and Travel channel has been made possible by viewers like you. Please, buy my books or get yourself a t-shirt, like or comment, and please, follow me on my other socials.
If Isaac wasn't a rich man before, he was now, and he needed a mansion. He bought a house near the Bluestone River and began renovating it. The house was completed in 1909, and no expense was spared. It had an ornate staircase, wood paneling, and the den had a studded leather wall. It even had a safe hidden inside of a wall. Across the river from the house, he built a playhouse for his children and their nanny to live in. It was the size of a regular house. The next year, though, a fire burned down half of Bramwell, but his house was spared, making it one of the oldest houses in the town. Isaac also invested his money in the local coal and timber operations, as well as the railroad, which also increased his wealth.
The first president of the bank was Bramwell himself, and C. Dooling was his vice president. Dooling was a coal engineer who had turned into a civil engineer and had helped Bramwell map out lots of land in the town. Real long story short, every president of the Bank of Bramwell was deeply related to the coal industry, like Jenkins Jones, who was a president of the bank and the president of the Pocahontas Fuel Company. Isaac spent 10 years working his way up the bank's ladder, and when Jones retired, Isaac took his job. He also ended up with another one of Jones's jobs, president of the Pocahontas Fuel Company. The Bank of Bramwell became a sign of wealth, and it gained national fame when it sold the most value of Liberty bonds in the country during World War I. A common phrase during this time was as solid as the Bank of Bramwell.
Here's how the rich get richer. The Bank of Bramwell paid 3% interest. It was also publicly traded, and the chief shareholders were the coal barons and railroad executives that had funded the bank. The stocks paid dividends of 100% of the bank's profits, and they were split between the shareholders, who then put the money back in the bank to collect their 3% interest.
In 1925, the bank had over $300,000 in deposits and made over $1 million profit, which was divided amongst its shareholders.
Anyways, I kind of skip over it on the timeline, but a few years before, the town of Itmann was established. Now, I'd like to point out that Isaac was very proud of meeting and making a lot of money with J.P. Morgan, and I can't help but notice the potential symbolism in Itmann being IT man instead of just either his last name, like Man, or the whole name, like Jenkins Jones. You know what really sucks? When you drive all the way out to Sticks to film a YouTube video, and then like 2 weeks later when you're editing it, you find out for your big money shot that your microphone broke. So don't mind me, I'm just going to record over myself. No average company store would do for Mr. J.P. Morgan Jr. He wanted the biggest, the best, and the most beautiful. So he hired Alex Mahood to build it. Mahood in the woods. This would be at least his 5th company store that he had built for the Pocahontas Fuel Company. Construction began in 1923. I kind of feel silly recording over myself, so here's what it looks like on the outside. Let's go check out the inside. Many Italian immigrants had been attracted to the coal fields for work, so many that they made up 10% of the neighboring county's population. They were known for being master stonemasons, and their experience in cutting and quarrying stone is what brought them to the coal fields in the first place. Being the president of the Pocahontas Fuel Company, Isaac could do whatever he felt like. So he pulled all the Italian masons off their coal mining jobs and brought them here to build the company's store. The stone was quarried from a sandstone outcrop nearby. To make room for the store, which sat on the main road, the company houses were moved to terraces cut into the hillside behind it. We're in the company offices right now. It's the smaller of the two buildings, 60 by 45 feet, and had 7,900 square feet of interior floor space. The company store is the larger of the two buildings. They're connected by a walkway and have a large courtyard between them. The company store is 75 by 50 feet. It is 2 floors plus an attic and a basement. The sales floor of the store was 2,400 feet with 15-foot ceilings. While the town was being constructed, the Ritter Lumber Company shipped in 200 pre-made houses. They were like Sears houses, and they were used for company homes, and they were assembled on site. During this time, everything was going good for Isaac. In 1923, his estimated worth was between 18 and 25 million. He began buying real estate in Chicago, hotels and apartment buildings. In only 6 years, he grew his wealth to 100 million. It's all good until it's all bad, and his luck changed in 1929. As the Great Depression hit, he went from having millions to owing millions. According to a relative, he was worth $578 million one day and owed $81 million the next day. He had to give up his mansion and sleep in an apartment above the bank. Just like everything else, the Bank of Bramwell, a pillar of wealth, began to crumble. The bank had reduced its dividend payments to its shareholders. They dropped from 100% to 10 to 5 to 2.5. In 1932, the dividend payments were reduced to 0. That's the same year that Isaac died. The next year, shareholders began the process of liquidating the bank. In 1960, JFK was running in the Democrat presidential primary, and he needed a little boost. On April 26, 1960, while his competition was in northern West Virginia, JFK planned a trip to the politically neglected southern part of the state. He had a bus to carry equipment and people, but JFK, his campaign manager, and a reporter rode ahead in a car and would just meet the bus at his speaking engagements. The car was much better at handling the West Virginia terrain, and he got off the beaten track and began speaking to the common folk. Here he is inside the Itmann mine, talking to the miners. He also stopped in nearby Mullins and Welch.
West Virginia began keeping records of fatalities in the mining districts in 1883. Since then, 21,000 miners have died in 119 disasters. One of them was here at Itmann. The exceptionally high quality of coal produced at Itmann produces a dust that is extremely volatile. On January 4th, 1972, coal dust ignited, injuring 3 workers. Then, on June 19th, a pocket of methane gas was ignited by the cutting head of a continual loader, but none of the operators got injured. On September 5th, federal mine safety inspectors began 5-day-a-week inspections. By December 16th, they had issued 4 notices of withdrawals and 89 notices of violations. That day, 9 days before Christmas, was a Saturday, and it wasn't on the inspectors' 5-day-a-week schedule. 121 miners entered the mine, and they had a normal day. At the end of their shift, 8 miners were riding an electric trolley to the surface, when the wire harp, which transfers electricity to the rail car, briefly disconnected from the main line, causing a spark. Larry Akers, a foreman, and Jerry Billings, the operator, sat in front. 3 more employees sat in back. There was also a car being pulled by it that held another 2 employees. When the wire harp and the trolley wire sparked, it ignited a pocket of methane gas. All the miners were covered in the high-quality coal dust, which quickly caught on fire. Jerry Billings, the operator, heard the arc and he saw the unusual spark. He was stepping out of the trolley when the explosion happened. He was extensively burned in the explosion, causing him to temporarily lose his eyesight. He traveled 200 feet deeper into the mine before realizing his mistake and turning around. Billings tried to use his rescue breathing device, but his hands were too burned to operate it. As Billings passed the trolley car, he saw another man called McMillans, who had been in the second car laying there, begging for help. But Billings couldn't help himself, so he ignored him and kept crawling towards the surface. He kept crawling until he passed out. Dallas McMullins had been the first person in the back seat. That made him the farthest from the door. When he heard the pop and felt the heat, he began climbing out over the other men. The explosion threw him out of the trolley car. Bailey was in the back seat of the trolley when the explosion happened. He activated his emergency breather, but he was also blinded and burned. He also walked the wrong way, and when he turned around, he also encountered McMillian begging for help. But once again, he couldn't even help himself, so he kept on crawling till he passed out too. When the rest of the trolleys returned except them, and the mine operators couldn't reach him on the emergency phone, the rescue squad was called in. Billings was the first one found, and 30 minutes later, the rescuers found the trolley. Billings, Bailey, and Mullins survived the blast, which claimed the life of the other 5 men.
During the 1950s and 60s, Itmann was the most productive mine in West Virginia. In 1958, the Pocahontas Fuel Company was bought by Consolidated Mining Company. The mine was producing 2 million tons of coal a year and employed 1,800 people. In the 1980s, the mine and store closed. It was owned by the Island Coal Company. In 1987, the company's store was bought by Bill Daley, who represented the 9th District in the State Senate from 1991 to 2009. He leased sections of the building to the post office and other parts to a homeless shelter called Stonehaven. In 1990, the company's store and offices were added to the National Historic Registry.
In 2019, Consol announced that they was going to reopen the mine, and in 2022, the first load of coal left.
The company's store and offices sat unused, and they fell into disrepair. But more recently, in the summer of 2024, they were sold to an investor from Texas. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting this fella and his dude while they was clear-cutting the building while I was filming this video. And it's a little bit soon for me to advertise this, but when he gets ready and does have like a non-profit or some type of business, I'm going to have a link for that in the description of this video. See, if you look right over my shoulder right there, you can see one of them going up the stairs with the weed eater. Kind of sucks my microphone broke. But anyway, y'all, this is my video. I hope you liked it. If you did like it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Here's some other videos you might be into watching.